Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, June 24th, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, and today's episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Cybersecurity Leadership, and it is recorded in Stockholm, Germany. Now, today I noticed that some Telnet Sage scanners did use a little bit an odd username, super_YG. This started on the 18th, so a couple of days ago, and has been used persistently since then by about a dozen different IP addresses that, in addition to this username, they also scanned for some fairly common usernames like root, guest, and other sort of common default username and password combinations. So this one stuck out a little bit. Turns out it's associated with an older vulnerability from 2017 in software that is called IP cameras and made by a company that I believe is pronounced Ichano. Now, the issue here is that even though this particular vulnerability was discovered and reported in 2017, there is no real evidence that this default username and password has ever been removed from this particular product. This is an IP camera product, but not your usual sort of standalone IP camera. It's actually software that can be used to turn smartphones, tablets, laptops, and such into IP cameras for surveillance, for security cameras, and with that, of course, a lot of the functionality and with that common vulnerabilities that we often find in these type of cameras are being exposed. And then if you're running Citrix's NetScaler appliances, well, it's update time for you. Last week, Citrix did release a critical update. This fixes a vulnerability that does allow unauthenticated users access to session IDs, which then, of course, could just simply be used to log in as any of the users these sessions are associated with. An update is available. You're vulnerable if you're using the device as a gateway, a VPN server, and the like. So not all devices are necessarily vulnerable, but certainly, consider yourself vulnerable if you're running an affected device, and please update. It does also say that you should kill all active sessions. Interestingly, they specifically say not to just rely on rebooting the devices. I'm not sure if during a reboot, some of the sessions may be maintained and may be saved and then reinstated later. I'm not that familiar with NetScaler, but they specifically say don't just rely on rebooting, but also run the commands and read the advisory for details to actually terminate any existing sessions, because these sessions, again, may have leaked to an attacker. And the attacker, of course, once they have access to sessions, can access any of these users' permissions and data, keys, and the like. So if you are vulnerable and you find evidence of compromise, you definitely have a big problem here. At this point, there is no public exploit I'm aware of, but the very similar prior exploit, the Citrix Bleed exploit, has been widely exploited a couple of years ago. So definitely I would assume that an exploit, if it's not already available, will soon become available for this vulnerability. And WinRar released a new beta version, 7.12 beta 1, that fixes a critical vulnerability affecting prior non-beta versions of WinRar. No idea when the final 7.12 will be released, but you may want to consider, if you're using WinRar, to install this beta version. The vulnerability would trick WinRar into extracting from a crafted archive files into essentially arbitrary attacker-determined locations, which then, of course, could also lead to arbitrary code execution if the right file can be overwritten. Interesting vulnerability. We have seen very similar vulnerabilities often in similar software, so I would certainly expect exploit for this vulnerability to surface pretty soon. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.